Falkirk sits quietly on the map, a practical town threaded by roads, rail lines, and fields that look no different from anywhere else in central Scotland. By day, nothing about it suggests tension. Aircraft pass overhead on predictable routes. Weather rolls in from the west, and the land settles into routine. Yet locals have long noted how often conversations drift toward the sky after dark. It is not fear that drives these mentions, but repetition. People describe lights that appear briefly, hold position, and then leave without announcement. The accounts are rarely dramatic. They are offered as observations, usually after some hesitation, as if the speaker expects skepticism. Over time, these small remarks collect. Different years, different witnesses, similar details. Red points that do not blink. White glows that feel too steady. Movements that seem deliberate rather than drifting. None of this proves anything, but the consistency leaves a faint pressure. The sense that something ordinary is being watched by something equally patient. The pattern becomes clearer when the stories are placed side by side. A firefighter mentions an object hovering during a routine call, perfectly still, making no sound that could be felt in the chest. A driver recalls slowing on a rural road as lights ahead reorganize themselves, no longer scattered but aligned. A parent remembers a walk at dusk, the children quieting as a glow slipped behind trees and failed to return. Each account ends the same way, with uncertainty replacing curiosity. Checks are made. Control rooms report nothing scheduled. Radars show no anomaly worth recording. The sky returns to normal, leaving witnesses with only their own senses to question. The events do not escalate in the moment. They recede. Days pass. Life continues. What lingers is not the image itself, but the absence of explanation. The way memory refuses to file it away, not by the late 20th century. The accumulation could no longer be ignored, not because of any single incident, but because the region itself had become a reference point. Lines drawn between nearby towns formed a rough shape that journalists and researchers repeated until it hardened into a name. The triangle suggested boundaries, though nothing visible marked them. Within it, reports rose and fell in waves, quiet years followed by sudden clusters. Witnesses described silence where noise was expected, motion without effort, and time that seemed to stretch or compress without warning. Officials remained careful, attributing most sightings to traffic, weather, or perception. Yet even these explanations carried an undertone of limitation, an admission that some experiences resisted tidy categories. Standing beneath the night sky in this place, one could understand how uncertainty itself became the story, not a threat, but a persistent presence that never fully left. It begins here, not with answers, but with attention, with the habit of looking up and noticing when the sky does something slightly out of step, long enough to be remembered, short enough to be doubted, and quietly enough to follow you home without announcing itself. Asterisk records from the period show nothing dramatic, only an increase in small, disconnected notes filed by people whose jobs required accuracy. Air traffic logs list routine crossings. Weather reports describe ordinary cloud layers and stable pressure. Yet margins fill with handwritten qualifiers, terms like unclear and unverified, added after official entries. In interviews conducted years later, witnesses recall not fear but distraction, the sense of having attention pulled upward at moments when nothing was supposed to be happening. A light appears, steadies, and waits. It does not blink like navigation lamps, nor drift like a flare. It simply holds, as if positioned. When it moves, it does so cleanly, without the gradual acceleration expected of machines. Observers hesitate to speak, not wanting to interrupt the quiet with assumptions, and that hesitation becomes part of the memory. Night driving through the triangle encourages routine, long stretches of road broken by junctions and reflective signs. Several drivers describe the same adjustment, easing off the accelerator because something ahead does not behave like an oncoming vehicle. Distance collapses strangely. What seems far brightens too quickly, then stops advancing altogether. In these moments, engines continue, tires hum, and the world feels normal except for the light's refusal to commit to motion. Some report colors shifting subtly from white to red. Others remember an outline, implied rather than seen. Checks made afterward lead nowhere. Clocks disagree with recollection by minutes that feel insignificant until compared. The road offers no marks, no smell, no debris. By daylight, the route looks unchanged, making the memory feel misplaced, like a scene remembered from the wrong location. Those who work nights become reluctant archivists of these moments. Fire crews, delivery drivers, shift workers, people accustomed to reporting what they see without embellishment. One account describes a hovering glow observed during an otherwise forgettable call, positioned above water and mirrored faintly on the surface. No sound followed it, no wash of air, only the awareness of being watched while doing a job meant to attract no attention. When the light departed, it did not arc or fade. It departed by deciding, accelerating past expectation, and leaving silence heavier than before. Back at stations and kitchens, the story is told lightly, then set aside. Official channels confirm nothing unusual. The casual tone becomes a defense, but it also allows the memory to persist, unchallenged and unresolved. By now, a pattern presses gently into awareness. The events do not announce themselves or demand belief. They wait to be noticed, then withdraw before scrutiny can settle. Each report alone is thin, easily dismissed, but together they form a rhythm tied to place rather than time. The triangle feels less like a hotspot and more like a pause, an area where routine briefly stalls. People leave with nothing to show, yet something has been added, a private reference point that activates when the sky grows quiet. In this stage, nothing forces confrontation. The mystery remains polite, almost cooperative, offering enough to be remembered quietly. By the early 1990s, the reports begin to overlap in ways that make coincidence harder to rely on. The same descriptions surface from people who have never met and have no reason to compare notes. Lights no longer appear as single events, but as sequences, one following another, spaced too evenly to feel accidental. Witnesses speak of noticing patterns only after the fact, when memory replays details that felt unimportant at the time. A red glow holds steady, while a second, paler light appears nearby. A pause follows, long enough for expectation to form, and both move at once. The movement is not hurried. It feels measured, as if responding to something unseen. These moments are brief, but they repeat across weeks and miles, leaving behind a sense that the sky is behaving according to rules, not immediately visible from the ground. Some accounts introduce an unfamiliar discomfort tied not to what is seen, but to how the body reacts. People describe a heaviness in the chest, a tightening that arrives without panic and fades without relief. Time becomes difficult to judge. A drive that should last minutes stretches oddly, not because of traffic or weather, but because attention narrows to the space above the road. When the lights finally leave, drivers realize they have been holding their breath without noticing. Clocks suggest only minor discrepancies, yet the experience feels longer, fuller, as if more occurred than can be recalled cleanly. This sensation follows witnesses home, resurfacing later in quiet rooms where nothing appears out of place. Investigators attempt to organize the reports, mapping locations and dates, searching for causes that fit comfortably within known explanations. Air traffic density is cited. Military exercises are mentioned cautiously. Weather phenomena are reviewed and discarded. None of these answers fully address the recurring details. Silence remains a common feature, as does the absence of visible propulsion. Even skeptics admit the behavior described does not match familiar aircraft, though they stop short of suggesting alternatives. Official statements emphasize probability and perception, yet their language grows careful, acknowledging gaps without naming them. The mystery, once local and anecdotal, begins to feel structural, woven into the process of inquiry itself. As attention increases, so does reluctance. Some witnesses withdraw their statements, uncomfortable with the attention or wary of ridicule. Others come forward only after hearing similar stories broadcast, reassured by recognition rather than validation. What unites them is restraint. No one claims certainty. They describe what was present, what moved, and what failed to behave as expected. They avoid conclusions, perhaps instinctively understanding that explanation would diminish the experience by forcing it into shapes too small to hold it. The triangle as a concept grows heavier, less a label and more a quiet warning about assumptions. In this phase, the atmosphere changes. The events no longer feel isolated. They suggest observation rather than intrusion, repetition rather than randomness. The sky does not threaten, but it also does not reassure. Those who notice find themselves looking up more often, not searching for answers, but watching for continuation, aware that whatever is unfolding seems content to proceed without acknowledgement, leaving people beneath it to adjust their understanding in silence. As the triangle's reputation deepens, the stories begin to include something new, not louder or more dramatic, but harder to ignore. Witnesses start describing proximity. The lights no longer remain distant points in the sky. They descend, hover lower, pass closer than comfort allows. In these moments, familiar reference points become unreliable. Trees appear darker beneath the glow. Water reflects light that should scatter, but does not. People report judging height incorrectly, only realizing how near the objects were once they had already moved away. The closeness introduces vulnerability, the quiet realization that if something went wrong, there would be no warning sound, no time to react. Several encounters share a similar shape. A walk interrupted at dusk. A vehicle slowed on a rural lane. An ordinary task paused without discussion. In each case, the light's presence changes the environment rather than announcing itself. Air feels denser. Background noise fades, as if absorbed. Those present become aware of their own movements, careful not to draw attention, though nothing suggests attention is being given. The effect is subtle but powerful. People later struggle to describe why they felt compelled to remain still. Only that movement seemed inappropriate, almost intrusive. During the observation, when the objects depart, they do not vanish. They withdraw. Witnesses describe watching them move behind hills, trees, or structures, leaving the impression that they continued nearby, just out of view. This behavior unsettles more than sudden disappearance would. It suggests continuity, a presence that remains within the landscape rather than exiting it. Some who return to these locations in daylight report an odd familiarity, not fear, but the sense of having been part of something unfinished. The land itself appears unchanged, yet memory assigns it weight. As if certain places have learned to keep quiet, authorities face increasing pressure to respond, but responses remain procedural. Reports are logged. Explanations are offered cautiously. No single incident crosses the threshold required for decisive action. Instead, attention diffuses, spread thin across many small events. This diffusion becomes its own problem. Without a focal point, concern lingers without direction. Residents write letters, not demanding answers, but asking whether anyone else is paying attention. The replies they receive are polite and vague, reinforcing the impression that whatever's occurring exists between categories. Visible enough to notice, subtle enough to avoid classification. By this stage, the triangle feels active in a new way, not busier, but more consistent. The same types of sightings recur with minimal variation, as if following a template. This repetition strips away novelty, replacing it with expectation. People begin to anticipate the lights under certain conditions, though predictions rarely succeed. When nothing appears, the absence feels deliberate, as if observation itself has been acknowledged and temporarily suspended. The sky, once a backdrop, becomes a participant in daily awareness that the unease here does not come from escalation, but from endurance. Whatever is happening shows no sign of resolving or revealing itself. It continues at a measured pace, indifferent to attention, content to be seen briefly and then set aside. In this way, the triangle ceases to be a collection of stories and becomes a quiet relationship between place and sky, one that asks for patience rather than belief and offers no indication of where it might lead. Asterisk by the time the fifth phase emerges, avoidance is no longer possible. The events have not grown louder or more visible, but they have begun to interfere with routine in ways that demand acknowledgement. People who once dismissed sightings as distractions now alter their behavior without fully admitting why. Routes are changed after dark. Curtains remain partially drawn even on clear nights. Conversations pause when aircraft pass overhead, followed by brief glances upward, checking not for planes, but for what might appear alongside them. The triangle has settled into daily life as an unspoken variable, something accounted for quietly. Like weather that refuses to be forecast, the handful of encounters during this period share a troubling similarity. Witnesses describe moments where observation feels reciprocal, though no clear action confirms it. A light holds position longer than expected, maintaining distance while remaining unmistakably present. The sense of being alone fades, replaced by awareness, not fear, but a subtle pressure to remain still and attentive. People later struggle to explain why they waited instead of leaving, why the option to move felt briefly unavailable. When the light finally withdraws, relief arrives without resolution, accompanied by the uncomfortable thought that departure was permitted rather than accidental. Time discrepancies become more noticeable, not dramatic enough to alarm authorities, but persistent enough to disturb those affected. Watches disagree with dashboard clocks. Short trips feel elongated, though no external delay can be identified. Some witnesses recount returning home to discover missed calls they are certain were not received. Others find themselves unable to account for brief gaps in memory, moments that leave no trace except a lingering sense of incompleteness. These gaps resist reconstruction. They do not present as blackouts or confusion, but as clean omissions, as if certain minutes were removed carefully, leaving the surrounding hours intact. Attempts to document these experiences intensify. Journals are kept, dates and times recorded. Patterns are searched for with growing urgency. Yet the effort seems to flatten the events rather than clarify them. Descriptions lose something when written down, becoming less convincing on the page than they were in the moment. The triangle responds, if it responds at all, by offering nothing further. Nights pass quietly. Skies remain empty. Then, without warning, a light returns, undoing weeks of certainty with a single appearance. The randomness feels deliberate, reinforcing the sense that observation itself influences what occurs. What unsettles most is not the possibility of explanation, but the impression that explanation is irrelevant. The events do not escalate toward confrontation or revelation. They persist, maintaining a narrow margin between notice and doubt. For those who experience them repeatedly, this persistence becomes a burden. Sleep grows lighter. Attention sharpens involuntarily. The mind begins to fill silence with expectation, listening for something that never announces itself. In this stage, the mystery is no longer external. It has settled inside the routines of those beneath the triangle, reshaping perception quietly and completely, making it clear that whatever is happening will not be resolved simply by waiting. Asterisk in the end, nothing arrives to close the story. There is no final incident large enough to force explanation, no moment that rewrites everything that came before. The triangle remains, unchanged on maps, its boundaries still implied rather than marked. Reports continue at a steady pace, neither increasing nor fading, as if settling into a long-term rhythm. Those who watch the skies learn that waiting does not bring answers, only familiarity. The lights, when they appear, behave as they always have. Quiet, measured, and brief, leaving behind nothing that can be collected or proven. Only remembered, some witnesses eventually stop reporting what they see. Not because the sightings end, but because language begins to feel inadequate. Repeating the same descriptions year after year seems pointless when no conclusion follows. Others continue to document everything meticulously, hoping that accumulation alone might reveal meaning. Their records grow thick with dates, weather notes, and careful phrasing, yet when read back, they form no clear progression. The events do not build toward anything recognizable. They circle, returning to earlier patterns, reinforcing the sense that the phenomenon is not moving forward, only continuing. Life in and around Falkirk adjusts quietly. Children grow up hearing fragments of stories, spoken without emphasis. Visitors learn quickly which subjects are discussed lightly and which are left alone. At night, people still pause in their gardens or at the ends of driveways, gazing upward for longer than necessary, not searching actively, simply remaining available to notice. When nothing happens, the absence feels neutral rather than reassuring. When something does appear, it rarely feels new. It feels expected, like a recurring thought that never fully resolves. Official explanations remain unchanged, cycling through familiar possibilities. Air traffic, atmospheric conditions, human perception. Each offers partial comfort without closure. Even skeptics admit that the triangle produces an unusual density of reports, though they stop there, unwilling to speculate further. The mystery survives not because of belief, but because of restraint. No one can say with confidence what is happening, and no one can say with confidence that nothing is happening at all. For some, the most unsettling aspect emerges only with time. Memories of the lights soften at the edges, details blurring, while the emotional residue remains precise. A sense of stillness returns unexpectedly during quiet moments, echoing the silence beneath those hovering glows. It is not fear that accompanies these recollections, but a lingering alertness, the feeling of having once been observed without being addressed. The triangle offers no sign that this awareness is misplaced. And so the story concludes where it began, with attention rather than answers. A stretch of land beneath a restless sky, marked not by evidence, but by repetition. Whatever moves above Falkirk does so without urgency, without announcement, and without leaving anything behind that demands belief. It continues to appear just long enough to be noticed, then withdraws, allowing doubt to settle back into place, ensuring that the mystery remains incomplete, unresolved, and quietly ongoing.